Okay, everyone. I'm excited to be here with Dr. Larry Lauer, and he is the mental skills specialist for USTA player development. And of course, this is Angelo A Rossetti here, and I'm really happy to be with Larry. He was my coach, mentor, certifier for mental skills when I got my high performance USTA mental skills certification many years back, and made more than an impression on me. I still incorporate a lot of what I learned with mental skills and mindset trainings today with athletes that I coach. Welcome, Dr. Lauer, and can I call you Larry the whole time?
Yeah, that'll be easier, and it's always good to see Angelo. And yeah, we had so much fun in that workshop that we did way back when in Boca, and just happy to hear that you've been able to use that in your career. So that's really nice to hear.
Yeah, and there was just so many powerful coaches there, and I really learned a ton. And what I'm realizing, through this pandemic, that mental skills, emotional resilience are so important. And we're seeing it, Larry, in so many sports, not just tennis, but, you look at the Olympics and gymnastics with Simone Biles, and then, of course, on the tennis side with Naomi Osaka, and there's so many people. I'm an NFL football fan. I like the Titans. Just as a kid, I loved the Oilers, and so now the Titans. And I remember there's a wide receiver that just talked about having mental challenges in the NFL, and so these games seem like physical contests, and they are, but the mental part is so important. The stat that I usually use, or that I've seen from the New York Times and other sources, is that 82.5% of the time the ball is not in play, and so therefore, what are you doing and what are you thinking?
Right.
And so I guess my first question, Larry, to you is, in regards to tennis, where more than 80% of the time the ball is not in play, what would be the first thing that you would want an athlete to think, or is it dependent on the score, the opponent, the surface, the tournament?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. Going back to what you're saying first, Angela, we have to remember that we're holistic human beings, and trying to separate things typically doesn't go well, whether it's separating who we are as a person from who we are as an athlete. I think the lid's off that now. Players in all sports are talking about their mental health and how important it is to them and to their performances as well as a professional. So whether it's that, or separating mind and body and thinking that I can battle physically, compete and push myself so hard and not have it affect me mentally. I think, again, people are buying into this idea now, holistic sort of nature of who we are as a species, and this mind-body connection, that whatever's going on with my body, that's affecting my mind. What's going on in my mind is affecting my body, and more, that's become part of the conversation. Directly to your question, Angelo, a lot of times I don't know if I'm going to give a great answer to this, but starting out with kids, when they're learning the game, we often start out helping them understand how to learn, and how to learn through the mistakes that they're making, because tennis is a very tough sport. And so helping them understand you're going to make mistakes, and how do you want to respond to that, and being able to see that it's part of the process, that these mistakes inform you, that they give you something that you can use to get better, which is what you really want, and you can't skip that. And it's a tough journey for sure, but it's one that we all have to go through to become better. And so trying to help the young players do that, and it's very important to me. So I think starting out, you really have to sort of get to know the player and build some awareness of what's going on. A lot of times players come into a first session with me and they can be all over the place, right? Because when it's happening to you, you're in the bushes, in the shrubs, in the forest, right? And you can't see the whole totality of what you're inside of, right? But when we can step back and take that view from above and look at the whole forest and say, okay, here's where you are. These are the things you're dealing with. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's start to organize this mentally and help them get an understanding of why they're experiencing what they're experiencing and where that's coming from and how they're thinking about it. And that maybe is now getting to your question. What are the thoughts that you're having that are really helping you? And one of the ones that are undermining you. I know those ones that are undermining you, there's a good chance that they're not realistic in some way. They're not real. There's not a real representation of what's going on here or what's going on with you. And so breaking that down helps the player to see how they have some control over what's happening and how those thoughts are then driving their emotions. So I'm getting really angry in matches and struggling to keep my leads when I make mistakes. Let's go back to how you view mistakes and how you view losing and how you view the way a performance should be. And there's probably some things in there that are irrational. You're expecting perfection, or you're putting pressure on yourself for someone else's. And so breaking that out, it starts to give them an understanding, a clear picture of what's happening. Then we can start actually talking about what does that mean for your tennis? What kind of tennis do you want to play? And as you know, probably better than I do, Angelo, I mean, those emotions are driving players to make poor decisions on the court. And so they're making poor tactical choices. They're making poor choices between points. They're rushing, and so they're out of rhythm. The choices they make and where they're serving the ball, or how hard they're hitting it, or what they're going to do with the return is creating sort of this momentum in the wrong direction. So we have to help the players understand what's going on. We need to organize it for them. What are your demands? What are your thoughts? How are you perceiving it? What are the emotional, physical responses you're having because of your thoughts? How is that influencing their performance? And if we can map that out with them, then they're like, oh, okay, now I understand it better. I can do something about it. But until you do that, they're kind of lost many times, which again happens to all of us. So that's sort of on a case by case. If I'm just teaching, straight up teaching, education, we talk a lot about routines.
Yeah.
Right, as you know.
Yep.
And I'm sure we're going to talk more on this podcast, but structuring that between points time period so that they're ready to play. And for us at player development, ready means that you're present, you're committed to a plan for the next point, and you have positive energy in your body and your mind. Again, we're a holistic being. Body language, but also the way we're thinking. And so bringing that all together, that optimal performance state, are you ready to go as much as you possibly can? Because as we talk about, if you are, you bring your best self to the baseline very consistently, good things are going to happen for you. But most players don't, and they don't really have an approach to create that. It's more based on chance or what happened in the point, right? Like, well, I played a good point, so I feel good. I played a bad point, so I feel bad. Well, that doesn't have to be that way. So we really try to break that down, help them understand what it means to be ready, start building some really simple routines so they can structure that between points time period and what's happening. So to that stat of the 82.5%, Jim Lauer pioneered this area, the 16-second cure. Let's organize you so that you have a way of getting to that optimal performance state consistently. And as we know, if you train that and you do it consistently, your brain starts to bring you to that space easier, right? Because your brain works off of steps. So if you have a bedtime routine where you brush your teeth, wash your face out, your contacts, whatever, you're turning out the lights, your brain says, aha, you want to go to sleep. It starts shutting down a little bit, quieting down, because it sees this series of behaviors. And we can do the same thing between points. So if you're training your brain, your body, like, okay, I do this, I do this, I do this, that means it's go time. My focus needs to be here on the ball, quiet mind, committed to a plan, good energy, let's go. And that's really what we're trying to achieve from a young age. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's sort of where we often begin and start to build out those things.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned, routines, and you also mentioned a couple things on, a good point and a bad point. With my coaching, I'm even trying to get away from even using the word good or bad, because I know my inner voice becomes the athlete's inner voice. And then if I'm judging them, because good and bad is more of a judgment, then they're going to judge themselves. And so what I try to do is create every error as a calibration. And okay, you missed it to the left. Well, you need to accept and be aware that you missed it to the left, and then aim more to the right. So you just need to calibrate. And so therefore, then the emotion, the negative emotion of failure doesn't kick in, because it doesn't feel like failure anymore. It feels like you're sharpening the axe and sharpening your focus and your placement and that sort of thing. And then every miss, you become closer to a make. And, rather than, I say there's productive double faults and there's unproductive double faults. And unproductive double fault is if you miss the first one long and then you miss the next one long or even longer, it showed you didn't make an adjustment to the toss. Usually I'd say long, toss it longer, net, toss it nearer, because your serve is circular and that's going to open or close the racket face. Therefore, change the toss, not your swing in any way. Keep the swing the same. But with that, an unproductive double fault is it misses in the same spot or worse toward the same spot, that it's mindless, that you weren't aware of where the miss was on the first one. So that mindless effort, and you and I have talked about that before, you can't allow your mind to just go nowhere. Yes, you want to be calm and peaceful, but you want to take data from your misses so that you can then calibrate going forward. So that I think is something that I use that seems to resonate well with athletes. But
that's good. Can I follow up on that, Angelo?
Yeah, of course.
That's tremendous coaching. I wish I had you when I was going through serving problems when I was younger. But that idea of moving away from good and bad, because you're lighting up the judge in your brain, right? The judge is saying, okay, that's good, that's bad, and then we're going to have some emotional reaction. We're going to react to that, and we're going to become more judgmental and distracted from our process in the present, as you're talking about. That was a little wide. Let's bring it in versus if that was bad. And so if we can remove that judgment, I'll ask them about good and bad, because they're already judging themselves. And I did this yesterday on the court. I'll say, oh, was that a good or a bad point? Oh, that was bad. I'm like, well, wait a second. You actually hit 15 balls in and you're calling that bad? I would say you hit 15 balls in, the last one just didn't go in. So what do you need to do? Maybe you need to be a little bit more aggressive and not try to just get the ball. Maybe you're doing the right thing, but so it's getting a little bit more, based in the process of what's actually happening. I think is very important. I had another thought, and that really you're going to have to maybe prompt this from me, but these errors that we're making, if we can see them for what they are, as information, as maybe like a Nadal approach to it, like my doubts, my errors, that's information for me, right? I'm going to use that to then make an adjustment if I need to. The other thing I will say about it, because this is really important for coaches that are listening, sometimes we train players, because I talked to them about this, sometimes we are training players to constantly fix things. They're like little mechanics. Like, okay, I got to get the wrench out. I made a miss. Get the wrench out. From my understanding, the guy that's on the cover of your book, Roger Federer, has also missed balls, and he's pretty good. Like, so I'm pretty sure that you can do everything right and still miss. That's just performance, right? There's fluctuations. If it was perfect performance, then no one would ever miss, right? So you're going to have misses, and understanding and accepting that. So you don't necessarily need to fix anything. You just need to focus in the present on what you're doing in the next point. Now, like you're saying, Angelo, if you're unaware and you're just going about things, you know, hey, I'm calm, I'm good, I'm enjoying life. That's great. If you're playing recreationally, do that. If you're a performance player and your goal is to get better and to win, well, that's not going to serve you well. So you got to be aware of what's happening and making those adjustments. You got to be more objective when you do it.
Yeah.
See it for what it is, right, Angela? Like, okay, that was a miss. That was a little wide. So I'm going to bring that target in versus, oh my God, what's wrong with my serve? Why can't I serve? But that's not the issue. It's just a matter of execution. You can do it. But because the judge gets involved and says, well, you're bad, or you're always one or the other, right? We have players that everything's great or everything's awful. Well, that doesn't serve them well either, right? Because now they're constantly judging themselves. Guess what their emotions are doing? They're going like this, up and down and up and down. Like, so there's no emotional control there because of the way they're thinking. And I think as coaches, and you're so glad to hear what you were doing there, Angelo. Hey, let's get out of that and let's just focus on the objective things that are happening. Make this little adjustment, right? If we need to. So really good stuff there, Angelo. And, you know, yeah, as you can see, I get excited about these topics because I think they're so important. And I don't think as coaches, we spend enough time really thinking about this stuff and having it inform our coaching. So
I completely agree. With the challenge with mental skills, emotional resilience, mindset, Larry, I've found is it's intangible and therefore more difficult to assign value to. And, you know, coaches like you and I that are trying to help athletes and coaches with coaching to mindset and mental skills, it is so important. You mentioned Federer. When he was number one in the world, you know, so top player in the world, you know, he missed, you know, around 46% of his shots. So something like statistics, something like that.
Awful.
He's awful. And
awful.
If he were to berate himself those 46% of the times, he wouldn't be playing tennis anymore. He would be miserable on the tennis court. He wouldn't find any joy in it. So I agree completely with what you said about you can't be, let's say, I'll paraphrase, overly happy when you win a point and overly upset when you lose a point. Yeah. It's all part of the process. And Federer has even said that in interviews where, you know, he tries to keep fairly calm between shots after shots, even if it's a big shot. And sometimes you can't help it. If it comes right out, okay, one way or the other. You don't want to control your emotions, but you want to channel them the most positive way that you can. And I want to piggyback off of something you said about changes versus, I like to say, tweaks, or you use the word fix versus, hey, nothing is broken. Because if you say, I try to fix this, you know, it's all broken, it's all wrong, or a bad, right. Well, there's nothing bad about that. It is what it is, or it was what it was. Let's make it what we want it to be. And to make it what you want it to be, I say words matter. So minor tweaks, minor adjustments, you know, it almost was in, make a minor adjustment. There's nothing wrong with you. And a lot of players, especially female athletes that I work with, seem to tie the self-worth to whether they win or lose. And winning and losing, yes, it's a metric of, there's a destination, and that when you play sports, there is going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. But if you look at tennis, and the reason why it's so mentally challenging and taxing is the fact that when two players step on the court, you know, and if it's doubles, when four players step on the court, 50% of that the people are going to lose, are going to have to face losing. So if you spin it and you put it in perspective and you say, hey, I what I like to say is I pre-accept the outcome, and the outcome may not go your way no matter how well you play or prepare, and that is okay. Mm-hmm. And the outcome may go your way, and that is okay too. So pre-accept the outcomes, and then use routines then when you're in the process of competing to get you to your performance state that you can get. Whether it gets you into flow state fully or not, again, that is okay. It's very rare to get into flow state, but if you get there, great. If you don't get there, that's okay. Find a way to perform well. Find a way to win with what you have and how you're playing in that moment.
Yeah, such good points. I think about a quote that was attributed to Federer. I haven't seen it in the press anywhere, but I think Chris Fowler said it. And he said, Federer said, when you accept that you can lose, you can start to win. And I think that goes to your point that on some level, you have to accept that there's a winner, there's a loser, and this ends some game. And so, I know that can happen and that freaks people out. But the reality is, what do I control? I control my process, the way I think, the way I prepare, the choices that I make, right? But I don't have a lot of control over much of anything else. So I got to get comfortable with that and really understand I'm trying to do certain things on this court. It's not always going to go my way. If you think about Federer, I don't know this, Angelo, but I would guess you mentioned all those when he misses, but I'm guessing he knows when he plays aggressive, he's going to miss some, and he accepts that. And he also accepts that the guy on the other side is so good, and so I'm going to miss naturally because that guy is really good. And I've tried to talk to the kids about that. I'll even show them like the point distribution. But when Djokovic plays, let's say Nadal, do you think that those guys just go on these runs of 5 games in a row often? They're like, no, they hold serve and the other guy holds serve. I'm like, yeah. So they're winning about 50% of the points. But what does that feel like to you when you play? It feels like failure. It's not. This is when you play someone that's good, which is really what we look for. That's how you get into flow, being challenged. You're going to lose about half the points, Angelo, right? And so I think we need to come to terms as American tennis players and as coaches that we're going to win about 51% of the points or less when we win, and that's okay. And that's tennis. It's not a game where you can control everything. It's not gymnastics. It's not figure skating. Someone else is trying to block you from your goal. So when you're playing people who are really good, you're going to go back and forth a lot. And they're going to make you make mistakes. And this also gets into this idea of unforced errors and forced errors as well, which is very informative for players when they start thinking about how they view their mistakes or they view how they're losing points. I think it's important to talk to them about that as well, especially older players, because there's a lot more forcing errors than there are necessarily unforced errors. You move up in the game, but it becomes more anyway. But yeah, it's such a good conversation. And a lot of what we see, the anxiety, the lack of confidence, the doubts, we can deal a lot with this just by changing the way we view these things, success and failure, errors, mistakes, in the language that we use. Because, and Jim Lauer said this, that we really train the way our players speak to themselves, because we spend the most time on the court with them as coaches. The words we use really do matter, and it's a window into really the philosophy, the perspectives that you have, and you have to talk about those things and bring them to the surface if you want players to change and to be less anxious and to go for it. So yeah, it's really fun work once you get into it, but as I'm sure some people listening, it's like, oh gosh, I'm not prepared to do that. And that's okay. That's where you get help. But you are, whether or not you like it, as a coach, you're training the minds of your players, and you are responsible for that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I'm big on the inner voice and what words I use, because if I judge my player, they're going to be judgmental of themselves,
Yes.
Good and bad. If I always ask, I try not to ask, how did the tournament go? because that implies, the outcome. So I don't even ask the outcome at all. My coaching team knows that with me is I will never ask a player whether they won or lost a match. Yes, privately, secretly, I can go online and check out the result, but I want to know, I want to know, did you do your routines that we worked on? I came up with this 3-2-1 method where it's an objective way to kind of crystallize mental skills things. And, I assign these values, 3 being the optimal, 2 needs work, and 1 needs a lot of work or unacceptable. And so, I think I mentioned this to you, I came up with focus on your eagle. Those are your controllables.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, and thanks. Yeah, it's effort. It's your attitude. A, gratitude. G, learning. E, an enjoyment level. Enjoyment. And those 5 things. It seems basic and seems broad, but a lot of players I work with after a tournament or even after a tournament match, hey, give me 3-2-1. You're 3-2-1 on those 5 things. Okay, my effort level was a 3. I was satisfied with that. My attitude could have been better. It was a 2, 2.5. My gratitude, I was really happy my parents brought me to the match. If they're under 18, they didn't get there. They have to get there somehow, right? And they were happy to be in the tournament. Learning. That could have been better, 1.5, because I made the same mistakes and I didn't adapt to what my opponent was doing to me. And then enjoyment, I did have fun, but it was a 2.5 because I could have really enjoyed it more. And usually I could tell the outcome by the score that they give me, but not always. But more. The number isn't to please me as a coach. The number is to make sure they're aware of what they can control and what they can't control, and get them, Larry, to focus on what they can control all the time. And I think that sometimes gets lost, because the whole reason why you compete is there is going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. But that is something you can't control. That is the nature of the sport. But what can you control? And that's why, I say, try not to celebrate too much after any one point, because you may lose the next point, number 1. And number 2, that could be a blind spot for you because you're still on a high from the last point. You're not ready, like you said, for the next point. And one thing I'll share with you, Larry, in working with, Ivan Lendl when he was coaching Andy Murray, he coached him, two stints. And I remember, talking with him, and he had said, you see him in the player's box, and Murray hits this amazing shot on break point, double break point, wins the game, is crossing over, and he's like kind of like to his box, get up and clap. And you see Ivan there, stoic and just kind of nodding his head, really not showing much emotion. And I asked him about that, and he said, yeah, because I want Andy to know that I expect, and therefore he expect that, he should be performing at that level, and it's not a shocker or surprise, and therefore it doesn't need to be overly celebrated.
Yeah. Well, I think it just puts you on the emotional roller coaster, like I said, when you go too high, easy to go too low. You're bringing up so many thoughts in relation, and it's so good. Like, one is, again, the words that we use, and I've read this somewhere, I don't remember where, but as coaches, even when we go to the language of "I like this," we're creating judgment, evaluation. The players feel that. Second thing I was thinking of as you were talking with the eagle, Angelo.
Yeah.
Focus on character process. We control that, controllables. So we're moving the focus away from outcomes, even though it's important, and we want to win, and we want you to go and try and win. really it's how you get there. That's what truly matters, because the win can't happen without the process, without your ego. So without the ego, you're not going to get wins unless the other guy's just worse or the girl's just worse. And typically that doesn't happen in high performance. So people are ready to play and will beat you if you're not ready to play or doing your thing. So to focus on character, this is a control, man. It takes the bricks off the shoulders, right? So you can just play tennis. Hey, it's about my process. I know I can be successful and feel good about myself if I control my process. And that really helps people feel more comfortable and get focused. And finally, you talked about measuring the intangibles, which has been a challenge for sports psychology forever. You know, one of the things, I don't think you're aware of this because I did this recently, but I with our internal national coaching staff, I talked about sort of 3 levels, kind of process-based evaluation, but you know, of mental performance. And the first level is that you're controlling yourself. And this is kind of like a call out to Don Hellison, social responsibility, emotional responsibility, that you can't really be successful unless you're under control of yourself first. And I think that's also relates to your Lendl point and Murray. So level 1, are you just able to go out and do what we expect to compete? Control your emotions. I'm not saying being a robot, you know, you don't have to be Lendl, you don't have to be stoic on the court, but that you aren't having these huge blowups, that you're not tanking points, that you're not going away, that you're doing disrespectful things. So the expectations, are you giving effort? That's level 1. And level 1's an expectation. This is things that should happen because you can control it. Level 2 is how often were you ready? Go back to our definition of ready I mentioned earlier. How often were you ready to play, which gets into your routines and getting your optimal performance state, how well you did your routines. You're talking about your routines and your evaluation. And that's a little less under our control. A lot of it still is, but you know, depending on what's going on in the match, it can be more challenging to be in an optimal performance state. But that level 2 is where you're ready to play. And then for us, the level 3 was, did you go for it? Like, did you just put it out there? Which was another level to me, because you can be ready to play, but not really truly just open up your game and go for it. And that's eventually what we're trying to get to, is that players, you know, whether we call it play carefree or, you know, I don't like to use flow because, like you said, that's hard to get into, but
yeah,
this commitment to your commitment and your conviction to your game is so great that the situation isn't determining whether or not you play it. And what I mean is, yeah, you'll play your game until 4-all, and then you start, you know, looping the ball more, right? Or taking something off your serve. You're willing to do it and face the consequences and continue to play your game, which is kind of what we were talking about with Federer, is that he will play his game, even if it might relate to missing sometimes because he's going for a little bit more. So to me, those 3 levels, at least what we came up with, or I came up with for our team, and as a way to help put some evaluation onto something that otherwise, when we look at, we start cherry picking things like, oh, I'm really interested in reactions, body reactions to point. That's just one small facet to a very complicated subject, right? Oh, I'm really interested in the routines. That's great, and that's really important. But you can have a routine and still be freaking out and swearing and throwing rackets, and your routine's not working. So, but are you?
Or maybe that is your routine.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is, and maybe you think that's working for you. But so I think whether it's what you're talking about, what I'm talking about, those 3 levels of mental performance, is taking a deeper look at what it takes to perform mentally, and putting it on factors the players actually have far more control over. You know, that they have a say in totally, versus this end-sum game of I won or I lost, so therefore it was good or bad. You know, and they do the same with playing well. I played well, I played poorly. Well, I bet there were stretches when you played poorly, you actually played pretty decent tennis. So let's talk about that. Like, what were you doing then? And let's try to have that happen a little bit more often next time. So getting away from these extreme labels, and focusing on the process. So the way we're doing things is really key.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Process focus leads to more desirable outcomes. Outcome focus takes your mind off the present. One of the things we talk a little bit about routines, but one of the things I like to do is have players, use sound and touch, use their senses to keep them present or to get them present, because you can't have a sense in the future and you can't have a sense in the past. You can't hear a sound in the future or the past, and you can't, if you touch your fingers, you can't feel that feeling in the past or the future. So you have to be present to experience those things. And so, like you said about staying present, what I try to do, I always say words matter. So the first thing is using the right words, like, okay, stay present, or be focused, or stay focused. But a lot of coaches say that, but then they don't give the player the tools that are with specificity to do it. So
yeah, just expect them to do it.
Just expect them to do it. But what does that mean, stay present? What does that mean to stay focused? And I think about this all the time, and I'm always trying to figure out best ways to do it. But, one of them is, 3, 2, 1 on your fingertips. As soon as you're done, put your racket in your non-dominant hand, because then it tells your brain the point is over. You can relax, refresh, recharge for the next point. And then, touch, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. And in other words, you slow down the cadence of it, the pace of it, and it gets you calm, and it slows you down and gets you ready for that next point. I know we're diving into routines right now, but you had mentioned staying present, and that's like one method I use, the touch, and the other I say is, listen for sounds outside of your court or wherever. As soon as the point ends, did you hear that truck drive by? Did you hear the car slam on the brakes if you're playing anywhere near automobiles? Did you hear the grunting, on this court next to you, or the ball or whatever? And if you do hear those things, that's taking you away from the emotion of that last point, especially if it was negative emotions you're dealing with, and gets you present so that you can prepare and get ready for that next point. Yeah. And yeah, I found it really powerful.
Very practical, great tools. And just relating to that, then, the players, you have to be really masters of refocusing as you move from bringing your attention to your senses back to planning the point and then being present with the ball. So we have to teach our players how to refocus, right? Or shift their focus is a better way to put that. So important. But, a lot of players now are talking about, Angelo, and we talked about this on our call before, focusing on their feet on the ground, grounding them as they're playing, as a way, what are my feet on the ground? I'm here, I'm good. It kind of has also that sensation of calming them. In our work at Player Development, we do a lot with breathing. We teach mindful breathing. We teach different forms of breathing, triangle, box, different cadences, because we know that our breath is something we always have with us. And it's something that we can use to slow our heart rate, slow our breathing, feel more comfortable, and get back under control of our mind, quiet the mind and focus. So we do a lot of breathing work with our players. Totally believe in it. To a level of, doing breathing work when you're in cold environments or in hot environments, and just switching it up and being able to focus your mind. But very good stuff. And again, all these things, Angelo, are awesome. And a coach is like, oh, cool, there's a trick that Angelo gave me. But it works for Angelo because he has a philosophy that he's teaching over time, versus, hey, why don't you just snap your finger, like 3, 2, 1, go do that. Well, that's not going to work for them, because there's a whole philosophy behind what you're teaching your players, right? A way of being and a way of thinking. And then these strategies work really well because they're based on a philosophy, right? That process first, that we want to be present. Well, what does present mean? what takes us away from present. And then training these things, right? If you're doing mindfulness or meditation or just essentially breathing practices, they can become really good at whatever, if it's things with the fingers or with your breath or being mindful of different parts of your body. We do exercises where you just bring your attention to different areas of the body and try to hold that focus. Athletes are pretty good at that, by the way, but that is helping them to become very present. It's quieting the judge.
Yeah.
One last thing on that, and is that we know that typically when you're in the past, you're being judgmental, right? So when you're in the past and in your thoughts, you're being judgmental of yourself. When you're in the future, okay, you're being anxious. You're often very anxious or fearful because you're worried about the what ifs, the uncertainty of what's going to happen. So the past can often create frustration and anger.
Yeah.
The future often creates anxiety and fear. Not always. We need to go there sometimes to plan in the past, right? Or learn from, reflect and learn. We also need to go to the future to plan and to learn. But when we're performing, the present is where it's at. 50 years of sports psychology research or more, and one commonality amongst all great performers, they'll tell you, was when I was playing great, I was in the present. And so our job is to create a present focus and give them the tools to do that. If we do that, then a lot of these things that become roadblocks, we can get through a lot easier.
I completely agree with that. And I love what you said about dwelling in the past is if you feel a sense of frustration, then you're past thinking. If you feel a sense of anxiety, you're probably future thinking. And just so I say there is, first awareness, acceptance. So be aware of what's going on. It's not, if you're feeling fearful or anxious, it's not good or bad. It is what it is, but now deal with it. You know what you're doing. So, I'm feeling frustrated. That means my performance level was lower than my expectations. Well, on cue, most athletes can't just all of a sudden increase their performance level, so therefore decrease your expectations. So make your expectations 0. I have this rule I put in my book, the 0-100 rule is 0 expectations, 100% effort. Because you can control your expectation on the outcome. So put it at 0 and be pleasantly surprised. And then when you're feeling anxious or fearful or nervous, a little bit of nerves in the beginning of a match is okay. But when you are nervous during the match, then you're not present, you're future thinking. And then there you can work on breathing, like you said, belly breathing, or, taking 3 breaths, or feeling your breath, or the touching of your fingers, or using your audio, your ears to, what am I hearing? And that will keep you present. So it's kind of like this, like you said, focus, it's like photography. You constantly got to focus and refocus. I just bought recently, I got myself a Christmas present. I just bought the zoom lens for my camera. And the zoom lens is big, so you have to use manual focus, not autofocus, right? And it is, Larry, so challenging. I'm trying to take a picture of these eagles, that are in my hometown. And you have to constantly focus and refocus. And it reminds me a lot of athletes, where you have to, after every point in tennis, focus and refocus during the point, after the point, on the changeovers. What's going on with your focus? What's going on with your process? Are you playing with purposeful intent? And if you're not, what tools do you have that you can deploy right there and then to get you to do that? And you had mentioned before about flow states, and I like to say, it's easy to play well when you're in flow. It's easy. But when you're not in flow, when you're distracted or derailed, how do you handle that? And I was giving a private lesson the other day to this young boy that I coach, and we're doing a practice match. And so I said to him, we did the racket spin. I said, no, wait, don't spin the racket. If you were to arrive at a match and you won the toss, would you like to serve or receive? And then he said, serve, Larry. And I said, okay, great. Then you're going to receive. What side do you like to play on? This side. Okay, you're going to play on the other side. So there, it's like I'm giving him not what he wants to see how he's going to react to adversity. And that's minor adversity because he's not going to harm himself in any way because he doesn't get what he wants. But I want to work on when players aren't playing their best. What are you going to do to play better? If you're not getting what you want, what are you going to do to play better? And you're not enjoying what's happening. What are you going to do to enjoy what's happening? And that I find is so key. In addition to, okay, when you're in the flow state, try not to question it too much, let it happen, and don't make it happen.
Yeah. A lot of thoughts there that just make me think of whether it's like this MAC theory, be mindful, accepting, and then commit. And that's why we often use the terminology, accept, control what you can control, and that's usually your breath and your next choice, and then commit to it and just do it. And I think when it comes down to this idea of focus, because Peter Haberl, who's at the USOPC, once said, focus is sort of the currency of high performance, and we're all trying to be focused. You have to get really good at being able to shift your focus and move in and out, and even between points, right, Angelo? When you start out, you have a reaction to the last point, positive, negative, or neutral, right? And then you go inward and you start assessing what happened. And we've been talking about this on this podcast here now. And so now I'm internal and I'm thinking about the last point. And then hopefully I'm able to refocus and just get my mind on what I'm going to do in the next point and become present, right? And then I go and I play. But through that process, I have to move from being internal in my mind and thinking and potentially analyzing things to external on the. And so being able to shift attention is an absolute must, is essential for a tennis player. If you can't, you're going to struggle. Just like any person who has to perform, especially when there's breaks in the performance, you have to be great at shifting focus. It's like ice hockey goaltenders, which I've worked a lot with in the past. They have to be masters of being able to refocus and shift their attention.
Yeah.
So to me, again, we get hung up on these things about, being positive or fixing things. To me, it's all about being present. And too often we're teaching players actually either to think too much, but also otherwise not being aware in a simple way. Okay, I missed that ball. It happens. I'm just going to bring my target in. Let's go. That to me is a great process with a deep breath in between points, good body language, come to the line, have good energy, get locked in. That's a great process. It's a great routine. And it doesn't require a lot of thought, and so I think sometimes we're expecting our players to think too much, and we've got to really work on simplifying things and helping them get to the simple and the concise. But yeah, all good stuff. Last thing I'll say on that, Angelo, it's really helped us. And I stole this from Ken Ravizza, the great sports psychologist.
Yes.
Who mostly worked in baseball, but also worked in football and some other sports.
Okay. Yep.
He talked about in heads up baseball, green, yellow, and red lights, right? Like when you're driving. And so we've adopted that in our philosophy of mental performance and player development, that when whether it's flowing or just doing well, you're in green light, right? You just keep going. And you just go through your simple routine. You recover, you set a plan, you go back to your rituals, go. But then you have to be aware when you're in a yellow light. Okay, now I'm distracted by my thoughts, by my emotions, some external factor. Something's got me off course. I don't feel ready to play. And this is where we need to take a little bit more time, go into that yellow light. And guess what? When you're driving, everyone, in yellow light, that doesn't mean panic, because that would cause a lot of crashes, right? Or it doesn't mean speed up, because that would
Yeah.
also probably create a lot of, although in Philadelphia, I know they do that quite a bit. Yellow light, hit the gas. But
Yeah, in Connecticut, they do that too.
I believe that. So but in this yellow light, there's a decision that needs to be made, right? What am I going to do? Am I going to stop, or am I going to keep going through the light? Well, tennis is similar. You come to a yellow light and you don't feel ready to play for some reason, you're at a decision point. What am I going to do about this? To what you were saying, Angelo. What do I want to do about this? How am I going to respond to this? And you have to make a choice. You could ignore it and continue to suffer because of it, or you can make a committed choice to something that's going to help you perform better. Or you can put yourself down and continue to struggle that way as well. So being able to go through that in a yellow light, taking a little extra time, doing some breathing, accepting where you're at with things emotionally, what the situation is, and then just really committing to something you have control over. All right, I'm going to play heavy here. I'm going to remove this other person, right? In finding that committed solution, that simple committed solution, helps the mind again to quiet down. When we create a commitment, our mind has a tendency to quiet down. When we're unsure and we don't really commit, our mind starts continuing to go through either options and or consequences, like what's going to happen now, right? I don't really know, because I'm not sure what to do. So going through this process, very extremely important for, that was redundant, but important for young players to learn a process so they can discipline their mind and work through, okay, whatever happened that last point, I'm ready to play again. And so having that process, is something that we have to be teaching from a young age, and in a simple way, but help them understand why we're really doing it. Sometimes we're like, okay, you go to your towel, and then you do this, and then you do that, and then you play. Well, what does any of those things matter? Like, what are you doing? Like, what does the towel do?
Yeah.
Well, you're taking time. Okay, well, why?
Yes.
Am I taking time to freak myself out more? To become complacent? Like, why am I going to the towel? What's the purpose of this, coach? Well, you go to the towel to refocus. You go to the towel to wipe away the past, take a breath, reset your mind, and now focus on your plan for the next point. That's what the towel's for. Well, why do I switch hands with the racket? Well, you already told us why. You're letting go of the last point, right? But we spend so much time, the coaches who are well-meaning, but then they say, well, if you take time and you use your towel, you'll play better. What? No, they need to know why they're doing it. It has to have meaning. When it has meaning, then you can really start to become a great performer. Until then, it's just steps that really, if they don't have meaning, they can be going through their steps and still be angry, nervous, embarrassed, frustrated, haven't changed, and just continue to be the same way. And so when we start talking about routines, Angelo, well, everyone must understand. Yes, we have the 4 Rs, the 16-second cure, these different models of between points. The steps have to have meaning, and the players need to understand what they're doing. And then start small, start simple. Get them to do one thing. One thing might be at a young age, I just want you to take a breath. When you go back, walk behind, take a breath. Now come back with good energy. Let's go. And you start building. Okay, I want you to take a breath. And now I want you to think about one thing you're going to do in the next point. Okay, now we're going to work at the front end of the routine. And you can work on this in different ways, but now that you have your breath and your plan, you're pretty good at those things. Now we're going to scaffold, and we're going to add, we're going to focus on positive body language and having it from the start of the between points time period. And then once we get that, we're going to go to the end. And there's no formula. You can start at the end and work back, or you can start, like I like to start in the middle, because what everybody has to do is they have to recover and they have to get ready to play. They have to have a plan, at least in high performance. And so breathe, recover, set a plan. If you're doing that, we're good. And if we can get the other things, that's awesome. So there's so much that goes in, as you know, Angelo, to routines. that we have to consider. But my advice is start simple, make the steps meaningful, explain why they're doing what they're doing, train the heck out of it, practice matches. Like you said, once they get better at it, then start creating adversity in practice, right? And test them to see if they can hold up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I always say you either can make matches seem like practice in your mind, or you can make practice seem like official matches in your mind. And, you know, I don't think there's any one right way, but what I found is the player is usually smart enough to know when it's a practice match. There's no umpire, there's no linesman, there's no officials, there's not a big draw board there, you know, in the lobby and things like that. So in other words, so then I say, well, then if we know that, you know, maybe let's get your mind to treat tournaments and matches as practice, just another form of practice that just happens to be an outcome. And I remember there's a martial art name that it's called practice, and that's the name of the martial arts. I reference it in my book, but you know, is when you go to a tournament, it's just called practice. And so I think if we can as an industry, you know, just say, hey, when you're competing, that's just another version of practice, and it's another opportunity for you to improve. And then you mentioned, going back to real quick, the routines and the towel, and I love that. And it's like the first step is making someone to use the towel, but then coming right after is the whys. Well, why are you using the towel? I mean, what is this going to do for me? And you know, it's first have the towel, and then put it at the edge of the court or whatever, somewhere where you can reach it after every point. And then based on what happens in that point, you do the routine. We've talked briefly about this before, but it's you make an error, the C erase replace, the racket in the non-dominant hand, you're in the towel, or you're walking to your towel and you're seeing the point, or accepting what just happened, you're erasing the error from your mental whiteboard and then replacing it with an image of you making that shot. I try not to have the players do the practice swings, even though you see it on TV, the pros do it. The thing is that is an indicator to your opponent that you're insecure about that shot. If I was playing against someone that did that to me, I would hit to that shot every single time after that, because I know that person is taking practice swings, and just take the practice swing in your mind, turn back around, go back to the towel, do your breathing, take at least 3 full seconds, you know, and then turn back around when you're ready. Like Sharapova, when she was competing, used to do, she had the same routine, you know, after each point, the hitting of the thigh, the bouncing, you know, and then what I say is, well, if you won the point, still do the same routine as far as amount of time going to your towel, but you're thinking of something different. There, Larry, I say, repeat it. See it, accept this, and repeat the shot you just hit, because now you get another rep in before the next point. And then, you know, if they hit a winner and it was just untouchable, then I say the eraser. You know, you clap your hand to the strings. It's great sportsmanship, but also, you know, is you know, great, because now you erase it from your mind forever. Don't give that great shot any more weight than it is. Erase it from your memory banks forever. And you know, and so that therefore you have the 3 ways a point can end. You know, you make a mistake, you hit a winner, or they hit a winner, and you have a specific routine in your mind for each of those. And I find that to be effective. The challenge is number 1, getting a player's attention enough to tell the why. And then 2, getting them to repeat it when you're not there.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, very difficult, and the ongoing challenge when players start to play tournaments and they don't have their coach there.
Well, and I think that's why it's a journey, right? As you know, that you're going to teach these things over the years. Some players get it quicker because maybe they're very conscientious and they want to please and they're disciplined from a young age. You see this in players sometimes, like, I'm going to do all my steps, but then you got to watch out for those players. They're just doing it to make you happy, but the routine's making no difference in their state or their thinking, right? So you have to dig into that. But then you have players who are very sort of the type B, spontaneous, loose. They just kind of doing their thing and they're riding the waves of the emotion, and they can be very artistic and very sort of creative. And you don't want to lose that, but you want to structure it a little bit, right? Like, okay, I'm not going to take your 25 seconds and turn you into Sharapova or Bartoli, but can you give me one or two things in this sort of wave experience you got going on? One or two things that you're going to do. So you have to know your players, obviously, as you work with them. That's something that I've learned over the years. But the more that we're able to help them have an understanding of what's actually happening between points and why they actually would have a routine to show up the baseline ready to play is huge. And then how you get there, people do it in different ways. It's a very individual thing, but now when you talk about like pre-match, Angelo, it's very individual as well. And I think that there's a few key principles you gotta factor in. One is that you want to take your focus and you want to move it from, if you think of like your zoom lens or your funnel, from wide to narrow as you get to match time. If you narrow it too soon, you might freak yourself out, right? Like think too much about the match, spend way too much energy. If you do it too late, you're going to show up late for the match, right? Like you're just not going to be there on time mentally and not ready to play. So one job you got pre-match is to get your mind focused in simple, strategic ways, focusing on how you're going to play. You can use visualization, you can use your journal, and then just being present, just kind of going through your warm-up and enjoying it, enjoying the movement, enjoying the feel of hitting the ball, but knowing your plan is set and you're ready to go. And again, everybody goes through that in different ways. So you have to have a way of sharpening that focus or getting it zoomed in or funneled in, if you want to call it in those ways. Emotionally, you want to try to figure out what are the things that I do to get myself in that emotional state, right? So listening to music, again, imagery, visualization, different things you might do to really kind of create an emotional state. What you're thinking about is going to charge up or calm down those emotions. If you want to be calmer, you use breathing. That's typically what we do. If you want to be charged up, you can accelerate your breathing and do vigorous kinds of warm-up movements. So you just kind of know what you're trying to create. So you have to have a mental and emotional readiness to play, and then your physical readiness, obviously, where my warm-up, my hit, what are the different purposes of those things? So there's a whole nother podcast, I think, for pre-match preparation here. But I think just to simplify it down from a mental perspective, emotionally, we're working towards getting to a state where they're committed. Maybe they're confident. We can't guarantee that would like that, but they're believing in what they're doing through doing their journal, through imagery, through a good warm-up, these things, listening to music. And mentally, they've locked their focus in. So before the match, they're not talking about the birds out there, right? Unless that's part of your strategy to calm them down. Most players, they need at least 10 minutes, 15 minutes to get focused in on and funnel down into that focus that they need. So consider that when you're talking about your pre-matches. What are we doing mentally and emotionally to get them ready as well?
Yeah, I completely agree. And, it is a journey and everyone is different. I was just doing some research and, I know Medvedev says I like to practice 2.5 hours before the match, but he said that's my pre-match routine. But if it happens to be a little less than 2.5 hours, I'm not going to freak out all of a sudden I can't put a serve in the box and the ball in the court. a lot of the guys, a lot of the male players, at least, they want the same shower, which I thought was interesting. They just want the same shower. They're superstitious. They want the same shower.
Yeah.
And hey, I'm not going to fight that. I like to, though, use things that are practical that all players can learn from. And hey, yeah, okay, using the same shower, great. But what I say there is, what if you didn't have the same shower? And that is the difference between a superstition or a ritual versus a routine. And I'll just end by sharing kind of paraphrasing a story I learned from the Olympic gold medalist diver, USA diver, Laura Wilkinson from Texas. And she had shattered one of her feet in dry diving in prep for the Olympic trials. And that was approximately 3 months before. And she had to rehearse it in her mind. In the beginning, she would do mental rehearsal. Then she would walk up the 10 meter in her mind, do the dive, and then walk back down and not actually do the dive. And so she only had a couple of dives a week or so prior to the trials. And then she won the trials outright by a huge margin, and then went on to went from last place to first place in the Olympics to win gold medal. And so she's big on, mental skills and rehearsal and that sort of thing. And one of the things I learned from her is really there's a distinct difference between rituals and routines. And rituals are based on superstition. They can control you. And routines are things within your control that have a specific positive impact on your performance. Like if you're bouncing the ball 3 times before your serve, that's giving you time to breathe. That is getting you to imagine where you're going to place the serve for that next one. And it gives your brain a heads up and a head start that here comes the serve. I know the serve is coming. And even Nick Bollettieri has said, hey, you can't just go out there and just mindlessly serve a bucket of balls if you don't do your routine before you serve, because then you're not really rehearsing reality. And right. And so, and I believe those things. And so I think if we can coach and teach our players to develop routines that they can control, that's based on controllables rather than that control them, then we're going to have them get ultimately more results and more enjoyment in the process.
Yeah, I would agree. With superstitions, if you have total control over it, okay, I guess. I just don't want those things getting in the way of the things, like you said, that really matter. And that often does, because players think, well, I have my routine. I don't step on the lines, or I do this thing with my hat. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's ritualistic, and that might be helping you to quiet your mind. But there are other things that actually can maybe be even more effective, like taking a breath or bouncing the ball a certain number of times, because you're doing that. You're creating a rhythm, right? A rhythm to the serve, a rhythm as you get ready, as you get in your return stance, you kind of sway back and forth and take a breath. Well, that's making you more physical and more external focus. So that to me, those are good things. But having to wear the same socks for every match, okay, if you can control it. But again, what happens if you got a hole in that sock? You're gonna wear it and get blisters? Like what's the end of this thing here? So that's key. And it's honestly, when you start giving up your superstitions, it's liberating, because you start focusing on what you control and what really matters, and players start taking more responsibility for their readiness and their performance. Before then, all my superstitions, I do that and everything's good. Well, yeah, meanwhile, you're not really thinking out there, you're not ready to play. So that's often, they do that to avoid being scared, versus I'm creating a performance state, a readiness to perform, right? I'm engaging with this moment versus I want to avoid I want our players to embrace the moments. I want them to engage with the moment. So superstitions don't really do that. Routines do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I remember I was playing a grass court tournament once, and on the baseline, the grass was worn off. It was in Rhode Island. And when so I always bounced the ball 3 times before my first serve and 3 times before my second serve. And that's my routine on my serve, and similar to Federer's. And I remember bouncing the ball on the grass, and the ball would bounce all over the place. And so then what I ended up doing was, it was so distracting to do my routine of bouncing that I just, with my hand, moved the ball up and down 3 times as if I was bouncing the ball. And that got me through the match and got me to win that match, because I used my routine. And so, but at the same time, I didn't make it a ritual like, oh no, I'm not bouncing the ball at all. I can't serve now. I'm inept at serving. No, I still took at least 3 full seconds. That way I can breathe, collect my thoughts, stay present, and imagine where I was going to serve, before I served.
That's really good. You weren't controlled by the situation. You controlled your response.
Yes, exactly. So, and that's my thing, is I want to help others, as do you, with trying to do this. I'd like to end with one quick story. Do you have a story, Larry, of an athlete that you worked with, that whether it's routine based or where, because I know athletes, USA tennis players, male and female, come to you for mental skills advice. Do you have you don't have to be specific with names, but a story where you gave certain advice, whether it's on routines or even in general with mental skills, and then they circled back and said, hey, Larry, this thing really worked and I got a great result?
Yeah, I guess one more recent that comes to mind, I was working with this female player, pro, and this person's on the way up. So they're not necessarily at the top of the game yet, but was trying to get a foothold in the pro game. And, we were really working on, being sort of confident and really having good energy and not that so much of that nervous energy, that doubtfulness, and showing that. So we had worked out, and it mostly came from her, but she kind of knew the structure of the routines, that, she was going to, kind of keep a good energy, good body language. She was going to encourage herself after points, and she had certain performance cues that she was using, and she was going to kind of bounce around. Pretty high energy, was going pretty quickly between points, but also knew to slow down when things started to get a little bit out of hand, and she did that well. Through that work, the person ended up winning a challenger level event, and I actually got to be there for most of it. And just talking afterwards, she felt like being able to exude that energy and be that way was so much better than trying to avoid certain things, being nervous or not making mistakes. Or she was focused on creating a presence out there versus avoiding something. That was so important. And I just think about with our players, so much time is spent on avoiding things, avoiding mistakes, avoiding feeling nervous or tight, avoiding the big moments, when, these are all things we need to embrace because they're part of the process, and actually, as we always talk about, all the good things in life and in tennis are going to come with stress. So let's get ready for it. Let's expect it. Let's accept it, and let's embrace it, because that's the journey. And so that was a cool story, and that person is continuing on to have success and is doing well. And I think that she's going to do great things, and her mind is certainly one of her advantages.
Oh, that's a great story. And I love that you can either focus on avoiding things, or you can focus on replacing that avoidance with something that's going to help you. And then therefore you just have to remember one thing, not all the 10 things that you have to avoid, but just that one positive thing. And then you can't do both at once, or at least you can't do both well at once. So might as well focus on the thing that you can control that would help your performance.
Yeah, and she was kind of like a force of just will and energy in that tournament when she won it. And it was very clear those routines were working well. And one of our measures was, and resilience was, how much was she bouncing back? Well, in that tournament, every time she got broken in that tournament, she broke back. every single
Wow.
time. And
Wow.
that just told me we are present, we're getting over things, and we're in the battle. And that's what she was looking for. And so that's one of our metrics is, okay, how are you performing after you get broken? Are you coming right back? Because we know you're going to get broken. It happens. You know, it's going to happen sometimes. Even Sampras got broken a few times here and there. So it's going to happen, and it's how I respond to it, not that it happened.
Completely agree. How do you respond to when things don't go your way? In particular, what is the response? Rather than, you know, that things are definitely going to always go your way, they might not. You want them to go your way, but how do you respond? And that's a great example of when you get broken serve, you get right back on the horse, you do your routines again, you know, no big deal. It is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Larry, thank you so much for your time. This was so much fun. Everything. We could talk hours and hours, but I'm sure we'll be speaking again soon. But thanks again for sharing with our audience all of these skills, tips, insights. If you have any topics you want to see in the future, you can always email me, angelo@tenacity.org, or visit tenacity.org for mental skills, insights, and inspirations. But Larry, once again, keep up the great work at USTA Player Development, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Angelo. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot. Bye.